Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who have been here before, we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. And if you're new here and you clicked on it because of the title, then you're in the right place. I know this is a makeup and skincare and beauty channel, which is my passion and I love it, but I have other passions and other interests and I wanted to try something a little different and maybe make it a regular series on this channel. Let me know if you like it and if you think that I should make it a regular series or if I should make a separate YouTube channel for this series. So a little background on me quickly. When I went to college, I majored in psychology. When I was taking psychology classes, I took a couple forensic psychology classes and abnormal psychology classes and a lot of other sort of classes along that same topic range. Even before that, I was always interested in the criminal mind. Why bad people do bad things. I was always really interested in serial killers. I watched a lot of true crime shows, true crime podcasts, and I never really wanted to share that with a lot of people around me because I thought that they would think it was creepy and that I was creepy. The category of true crime that interests me the most are the cold cases, the unsolved mysteries, the things that are still left unknown. And it interests me because, as I think it interests anybody else, there's no conclusion, there's no closure. Not for us, not for the people involved. So I want to start a series called Mystery Mondays, where we, every single week, talk about a different unsolved murder, disappearance, crime, usually murder, disappearance. And then we talk about the details of the case and theories of the case and kind of where it's left now. I was thinking, can I do this on a beauty channel? I don't know. But then I did some researching on YouTube and I found another YouTuber. Her name is Bella Fiore. She's a gorgeous Australian YouTuber who has a channel where she does Mystery Mondays, which is where I got the idea from. She also does beauty videos and she does Get Ready With Me's and she does reviews on beauty products. So I said, why not? I mean, I think that other people are interested in these things as well. And maybe like me, they're ashamed to admit it because they feel like it makes them creepy, but they might enjoy this. So let me know in the comments if you do enjoy this. Let me know if you want me to continue it here or if I should branch off and do it on a different channel so that you don't have to see it if you don't want to. So for our first case, I picked something a little closer to home, literally. I decided to talk about the Caledonia Jane Doe cold case. I live in upstate New York. I'm not gonna say exactly where, but Caledonia is quite close to where I live. So when things like this happen in basically, your backyard and they haven't been solved, it's creepy, right? Because you're thinking, is this person still out there? Are they alive? Do they live here? Have I met them? Your mind goes in all sorts of places. And I've heard about this case over the years and I've always been interested in it and felt a close emotional connection to this victim, which I know a lot of other people in the Caledonia and Livingston County area, as well as outside of that area, have felt the same connection. So let's get right into it. This is the story of Callie Doe. On November 10th, 1979, the body of a young teenage girl is found in a cornfield in Caledonia, New York. So Wes Clements is one of the men who discovered the body at first. Wes and his father were walking past the cornfield because it was their farm, and they were walking past the cornfield, going to the corner to get a cup of coffee before they started their work on the farm for the day. Wes actually still lives and works on that same farm, and when he talks about this story to this day, you can tell that it visibly affects him, which I completely understand. When they were walking and they saw the body, Wes's father at first thought maybe it was a Halloween prank or a prop of some kind because Halloween had just been about a week and a half before that. So they got a little bit closer, probably to, if it was a prop or trash or something, to grab it out and clean out the cornfield. And then they discovered that it was the body of a 16-year-old girl. They obviously at that time called the police, and when the police showed up, they initially thought it might have been a hit and run. The cornfield was situated on a very busy highway, and her body was only about 20 yards off the road into the cornfield. So they thought maybe somebody had been driving and hit her and she had flown into the cornfield and they just never stopped. It was only when they got closer that they saw the 2 gunshot wounds, one in her back and one in her head. One of the first responders on the scene was named John York. John York became pivotal in this investigation because he developed an almost obsession with it. He really wanted to find out what happened to this girl, and he wanted to solve the crime. And he put a lot of work and effort and time into doing so. And you have to remember that this was back in the late 1970s, where there wasn't things like the internet, DNA evidence was not used the same way as it is today. So he put a lot of manpower and time and effort into solving this case, so he will continue to pop up throughout this story. Right away, John York realized that the evidence was going to be very minimal. It had rained profusely the night before, so she was soaking wet and everything on her body was basically washed off. Her pockets had been turned inside out, clearly to dispose of any identification that she would have on her to make it more difficult to find out who she was. Because she had no identification and nobody had come forth to claim her, they gave her the name Callie Doe, which was short for Caledonia Doe. The clothes she was wearing when she was found, for the most part, were described to be pretty much unremarkable. She had a boy's plaid shirt on with a collar, she had brown corduroys on and brown shoes on. But she was wearing one article of clothing that did stand out to the investigators as being something they hadn't seen before. It was a red jacket with black stripes on the sleeves. The label in the jacket said Auto Sports Products. So basically, that was their only lead at this point. She also had a few pieces of jewelry on her. She wore a small silver necklace that had turquoise beads on it. It was described to be almost of a handmade quality in a sort of a Native American replica kind of fashion. Lastly, on the belt loop of her brown corduroy pants, she wore 2 silver keychains that they assumed she had picked up along the New York State highway. One was a key and one was a heart. On the heart, it said, "He who holds the key can open my heart." The only thing the police could really gather from her appearance was that she probably wasn't a native New Yorker. She had tan lines that hadn't faded yet, and because tanning beds in the 70s weren't widely used at that point, it was assumed that she had gotten it from a warmer climate area. Because they had so little to go on, basically the police just set out on foot and in cars and started canvassing the area. They visited something like 70 restaurants before they ended up at the Lima Diner. The Lima Diner still exists today, but I think it's called something like the Lima Family Restaurant. But either way, they ended up at the Lima Diner. At the Lima Diner, they discovered their first witness and possibly the last person to see Callie Doe alive besides the person who killed her. Marge Bradford was serving tables at the Lima Diner at this time, and she was 18 years old. She was working the Friday fish fry the night that Callie came into the diner, and she remembers Callie coming in because Callie came in with a man. They were strangers, they weren't locals, and it was also a Friday night, so the dinner rush had already passed and the bar crowd hadn't started coming in yet. So it was pretty much dead in the restaurant. Callie and the man she was with were some of the only 2 people in there besides the staff. The girl matched Callie Doe's description, and Marge also gave the police some information on the man that Callie was with so that they could create a composite sketch of him. Marge said the man was about 6 feet tall with brown curly hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She also recalls that the pair seemed to know each other, that Callie didn't seem nervous or upset or scared, that they were laughing and seeming to have a good time. She said they seemed to know each other, but not in the way that, a couple would, almost like they were brother and sister. The meal that Marge served Callie that night was pretty standard diner food for the time, boiled ham, potatoes, and corn. And they know that this girl was Callie because those are the same contents in the stomach of the dead girl found in the cornfield. So they finally had a little bit of a lead. Somebody had seen her, and they kind of had what they thought to be a sketch of the suspect. They began to circulate the pictures of the alleged suspect that had been with Callie at the diner, as well as Callie, asking, has anybody seen these people? Does anybody know who these people are? Sending it off to different police stations around the country, and they really didn't get any word back. So at this point, John York only had the jacket to really go on. So he funneled a lot of his time and energy into finding the manufacturer of this jacket. He finally tracked down the manufacturer. How, without Google and the internet, I don't know, but that's why he's a cop and I am not. He tracked down this man, and I think he was like a mushroom farmer in California. He initially had not wanted to talk to John York because he thought that John was from the IRS, you know, trying to get him for some tax evasion thing, I guess. And John had to actually fax over identification of who he was to this guy, so it took a lot of time before he got him on the phone. And when he did finally get him on the phone, the man in California basically said, you're not gonna like what I have to say because these jackets were made in the thousands. I made a couple of thousand of them, and they were sent out as a one-time promotional item. I don't have any paperwork on it. I don't have a paper trail. I don't know where they went. There's no way to track where they were sent out to. That was another dead end for John at this point. So basically the trail went cold right at this point, but they didn't stop looking, they didn't stop searching, and the town of Caledonia and its surrounding areas sort of adopted Callie as their own. They felt really bad that this young girl had gone missing and nobody had reported her missing. Nobody seemed to be looking for her. They buried her in nearby Dansville, New York in Green Mountain Cemetery. They put a really nice headstone on her grave, and on it it said, "Lest we forget unidentified girl, with the month and year which she died." In the years following the murder and discovery of Callie Doe's body, the police continued to search for who she might be and what had happened to her. They worked with the FBI, they worked with other criminal agencies across the country, and there was nothing. Until 1984. In 1984, John York actually traveled to Texas to interview notorious serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, who had confessed to the police there that he had killed Callie Doe. He was in prison at that time, already having been caught for his other murders, so he basically told the Texas Ranger that he was responsible for it, he had done it. They at that point obviously called John York. John York wanted to hear what he had to say, so he went to Texas and went to the prison that Henry Lee Lucas was at and sat down and talked to him. Once interviewing Lucas, John got the impression that it really wasn't him. For the most part, Lucas seemed to know the meat and potatoes of the case, which he could have gotten from newspapers or TV or other inmates, but what he didn't know were smaller details, and you have to understand that this was several years later, so his memory could have just been fuzzy. He could have had interactions, violent interactions, with so many other young girls that he got the details mixed up. John York actually asked Henry Lee Lucas, was this girl wearing any jewelry? And Henry Lee Lucas said yes, she was, and that it was a gold necklace with a teardrop. When we know she wasn't wearing a gold necklace with a teardrop, she was wearing a silver necklace with turquoise beads. He didn't know small details like that. He also said he committed the murder with fellow serial killer Otis Toole, who was also in prison for his crimes in a different state. When Otis was asked about these claims, he said, yes, he's right, we did this crime, we committed this murder, and his story matched Lucas's identically, which kind of threw law enforcement off because they were in separate states and separate prisons, and there was no way for them really to communicate with each other to make sure that they were on the same page when they talked to police. So that was a little bit unsettling. When Otis Toole was asked, well, why did you kill her? He said, because she talked too much. While John York was in Texas interviewing Lucas, another serial killer named Christopher Wilder was being apprehended by law enforcement. He had just gone on a killing spree across country, and I think he had something like 8 or 9 victims under his belt, and it fit his MO. He seemed to be drawn to young girls who were vulnerable, alone, and could be charmed by him. He would tell them that he would give them a career in modeling, that he was in the industry, he could help out, he was a photographer, bring them into his car, and then he would kill them. The way he got caught was the last girl that he attempted to kill. When he dumped her body, she was not dead, thank God, so she actually waited until he left and then somehow made her way to a police station and turned him in. And what's weird about that is, as John York was in Texas interviewing Lucas, who claimed to have committed this crime, Wilder was dumping a body, as Callie Doe had been dumped on the side of the road, in another county in New York, just 60 miles from where Callie had been found, Yates County. So, coincidence? I don't know. Unfortunately, when he was apprehended in New Hampshire, there was a struggle, and both Wilder and the police officer who had spotted him and tried to apprehend him were shot and killed. Some people say it was an accident. A lot of people think that he committed suicide knowing he was about to be caught and put away for a very long time, because he did shoot himself through the chest. So that is unknown, and we will never get his side of the story to see whether he was involved in this crime or not, as well as many other crimes I'm sure he was involved in that he was never caught for. So they weren't really able to corroborate or believe the stories of Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas, and Christopher Wilder was dead. So with that, the case sort of went cold. There was no more major leads to follow up on. There was nothing else. They didn't give up looking, but they didn't have any further action to take. In 2013, a woman in Phoenix named Laurel Knoll was searching online for a former classmate and her best friend from high school. Laurel had moved away from her hometown of Brooksville, Florida in the 70s and hadn't seen her friend or heard from her friend since then. And she really wanted to reconnect. With the advent of the internet, and now there was Facebook and social media everywhere, she thought it would be a lot easier now to find her friend than it had been in the past years. The funny thing was, she couldn't find any trace of her friend on the internet anywhere, and that was strange. Instead of giving up, Laurel continued to search the internet and did Google searches and all sorts of things looking for her friend Tammy Jo Alexander. She never did find Tammy Jo, but what she did find was a comment on another website asking about Tammy Jo, and the website was called Zaba Search. The message was written by Kevin Williams, and it took me a while to do the research for this video because there was so much on the internet and I went down the rabbit hole, but I actually found the original Zaba Search post from Kevin, and just knowing the story behind it, I was very unsettled by it. But here's what the post looks like, and this is what it says. I'm trying to find a woman named Tammy Jo Alexander. She would be 44 now and used to live in Brooksville, Florida. Her mother is Barbara Jenkins and her father is Bobby Alexander. I believe she was born in Atlanta on 11/2/63. She became missing in 1978-79 and may have fallen into prostitution in St. Petersburg. If anyone has any information, they can reach me at, and then his contact info. So Laurel sees the post from Kevin and reaches out to him as he left his number in the post, and she asks him, when's the last time you've seen Tammy? And Kevin basically says, I haven't seen her in a really long time. I haven't heard from her. The last time I heard from her was in 1979. I saw her in Florida. I didn't know who she was with, and I just have this bad feeling that she didn't go a good way. So Laurel continues to search online, and she doesn't find out anything about Tammy's whereabouts, but she does find an obituary for Barbara Alexander, Tammy's mother, and in the obituary, Tammy is listed as deceased. And she wasn't sure why. It didn't give a reason. She couldn't find a death certificate or an obituary for Tammy. The obituary did help Laurel reach out to Pamela Dyson, who was Tammy's half-sister. And when she got a hold of Pamela, she basically asked Pamela, have you heard from your sister? Pretty much what she did with Kevin. Have you heard from your sister? Do you know where she is? And Pamela said, much of the same, that no, she hadn't seen her since she ran away from home in 1979, that she hadn't heard from her, and she sort of just assumed that Tammy had run away, as she often did in the past, and had started a new family and started a new life and just wanted to leave her old life behind her. According to Dyson, Tammy's half-sister, their home life was awful, just awful. Their mother was addicted to prescription drugs, so she was a drug addict. She was volatile. She was prone to fits of screaming, hitting the girls, locking them in closets. Pamela herself spent most of her life in and out of foster homes and living with her grandmother, not in the house with Tammy and her mother. So she, didn't have a lot of early childhood memories of Tammy, but the memories she did have of Tammy were good. She remembers her being a good girl, and they did see each other from time to time. Both Laurel and Pamela did admit that Tammy had run away multiple times trying to escape this toxic home life. Laurel recalls a time that Tammy and she had decided they were going to run away from home. And they would often do things like this in the past. They would skip school for the day and they would go to nearby Tampa and spend the day there and just having fun and being teenage girls. It's normal. I did it. Most teenage girls do that. You skip school, you have fun for the day. But Tammy was insistent that she wanted to run away, and she didn't want to go to Tampa. She wanted to get as far away from Brooksville as possible. So one morning, they had planned they were going to run away and escape, and the girls, they did just that. They basically ran away, and they hitchhiked their way from Florida to, I believe it was like Arizona. Finally, one of the truckers that they had hitched a ride with basically said to them, this is crazy. You're young girls. You need to call your mothers and you need to go home. Laurel hadn't needed much convincing on that front, since she hadn't really wanted to run away to begin with. And she was missing her mother since, she said California. When they hit California, she had started missing her mother, but Tammy insisted that they wanted to keep going. And there was this time where one of the men who had picked them up brought them to a bar, and they got really drunk, and she said it was just ugly and messy, and she doesn't go into specifics about what happened to the girls that night, but she said that for her it took the shine off of running away, that she just saw the dark underbelly of the world and just wanted to go home. So she did call her mother, and Tammy claims to have called her mother. Tammy told Laurel that she called her mother, and her mother basically said, I don't care where you are, I don't care if you come home, I don't care what you do, basically I don't care about you. And that she wasn't gonna come get her or help her in any way. Now, granted, Tammy didn't want to go home, so she could have made up this story about calling her mother just to stay out on the road. But either way, Laurel's mother flew them both home because she wasn't gonna leave this 15-year-old girl, wandering out in the wilderness, hitchhiking across the country. So she flew them both home. Once they got home, Laurel and Tammy proceeded to get into a couple more troublesome events together. And once again, Laurel didn't want to go into specifics about these events, but she basically said that at that point, her parents were like, we don't want you hanging out with this Tammy girl anymore. She seems to be a bad influence. And at one point felt like it was so detrimental for them to be around each other that they decided to pick up and move to New Mexico. Once Tammy found out that Laurel was moving, she had, I believe, been out of school at that point, had dropped out of school by that point, but she caught a ride into school to say goodbye to her friend, and she gave her a really beautiful letter, which I will put up pictures of. And basically in the letter, she says to Laurel, I will remember you until the day that I die. And with that, they said goodbye, and that was the last time that Laurel ever saw Tammy. So back to Pamela Dyson, Tammy's half-sister. Pamela told everybody, that she was under the impression that Tammy's disappearance had been reported to the police. She said, my mother was no gem, even comparing her to Joan Crawford, as far as, if you know anything about Joan Crawford, she was crazy. But she said, my mother, her favorite was Tammy. She adored her. So I really do believe that if Tammy had gone missing, my mother would have reported her missing. Unfortunately, with the Brooksville police, there was no missing persons report filed. They never heard about Tammy's disappearance or running away, and since this has all gone down, Tammy's mother has passed, so we can't ask her. I am of the belief that she did not file a missing persons report, that she probably just assumed her daughter had run away again, and probably didn't care too much. Maybe she was high at the time, maybe she was, I don't know. As a mother, I can't imagine just letting my child go and hitchhike across country like she had done previously and not make an effort to find her, but that is what I believe happened. I do not think she made an effort to find her daughter. I'm even surprised that her sister Pamela, even years later when she became an adult, never questioned the whereabouts of her half-sister, never tried to find her. I don't know. We can't really be too hard on these people because we don't know the situation, but I can't believe that you would just have your sister there one day and gone the next, and that you would never wonder about that. Try to find her. According to Pamela, she did wonder about her sister, and she said that she imagined that she was married and started a new life and had children of her own to dote on and give her love and affection to. And as that is a really nice story and sounds pretty and rosy, well, that ended up not being the case. So once the two women figured out that a missing persons report had never been filed for Tammy, they did go ahead and do that, and she was put into NamUs, which is the database for missing and exploited children, and that is when a snowball effect happened and things really started happening. A California resident named Carl Kopelman, he was part of this online community called Web Sleuths, and basically it's a group of people who are really interested in, probably like me, interested in true crime, interested in unsolved cases, and they want to help do whatever they can to kind of put these pieces together. So he had already come across Callie Doe's picture, and when he saw Tammy Jo Alexander's picture pop up, he said, I've seen this girl before, right? I've seen her. And he grabbed the picture of Callie Doe and looked at the picture of Tammy and said, these are the same person. He then reached out to the Livingston County Sheriff's Department, and they grabbed some DNA from Pamela, matched the DNA, and found that Callie Doe was in fact Tammy Jo Alexander. So now we know who Callie Doe is. We know that Callie Doe was Tammy Jo Alexander, a really troubled Florida teen who ended up dead in a cornfield in upstate New York with no clue as to how she got there or who did that to her. And unfortunately, because they identified her almost 35 years after finding her body, there wasn't a lot that they could go on. What happened to her? How did this girl end up in this field? How did she go from point A to point B? What happened in the middle? They don't really know, but we have some strong theories. First, you have the serial killer theory, right? We've already talked a little bit about that. Since both Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole confessed to being a part of her murder, we have to consider it as a possible option. Although Lucas didn't know a lot of the small details about the murder and about Callie herself, we have to understand he was interviewed almost 5 years after the murder. And like I said, your memories can dim a little bit after 5 years, things can get confusing, and if you're a serial killer and you've murdered many young girls and many people, you may start to get your lines crossed and get your murder victims confused. It is possible. The police say that Toole and Lucas had no way of communicating with each other between prisons, so it was very uncanny how their stories were so similar. And I'm not sure that's exactly true. I mean, anybody who's seen any sort of prison show knows that there's always, blurred lines when it comes to things in prison, especially for more high-profile prisoners. Could they have called each other? Could they have written each other? Who knows? I know I'm sounding ridiculous here, but Lucas could have, bribed a prison guard to smuggle a letter out to Toole without it being opened and read. And obviously that prison guard is not going to come forward at this point because he did something really wrong, and you know, who even knows if that person's alive at this point. That was an accomplice to this sort of shenanigans. But I feel like serial killers in general have a personality profile where they like to be in charge, and when they're caught and confined in prison, they feel like they are no longer in charge, so they have to do something to regain that control on law enforcement and the people around them. And I think that Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas could have potentially just been playing a game with law enforcement, doing this to waste their time for entertainment purposes, to feel like they once again had control over somebody and were being the puppet masters to this whole entire charade, which never happened, just to waste time and resources of the police department, who were the people that ended up putting them away. So sort of revenge, sort of entertainment. I don't know. I don't think either of these men killed her, but we have to consider it. Now, the Australian race car driver Christopher Wilde, this is a theory that I actually believe, and when I was researching this, I found a lot of stuff that was like connecting and making sense, and I was like, whoa, I think that he might have done it. You know, when I was initially doing research and I listened to a podcast that was done on Tammy Doe, I was like, oh, you know, maybe. But when I was doing my own research and Googling and going to all sorts of crazy message boards and pages and getting really deep in there, like you'd be surprised what you can find on the internet, I really began to believe that he was the one responsible for her murder, and here's why. So Christopher Wilder's life is like a story of a person who should have never been born, honestly, and should have sent up red flags everywhere he went to everybody he met, and should have been put away long before he had a chance to hurt so many people. But here's the story. He was basically born really sickly, and they actually gave him last rites because they didn't think he was gonna make it, but he ended up pulling through. When he was 2 years old, he almost drowned in a swimming pool. And I'm not a super religious person, right? But I almost feel like this was the universe's way of saying, like, this person should not have been born. This person's going to be trouble. Like, let us get rid of him. But he just wouldn't die, so he eventually grew up to become this serial offender of sex crimes against women and young women in general. In 62 or 63, he actually pleaded guilty to a gang rape in Sydney, where he lived. He was at that time sentenced to probation for whatever reason, because, you know, jail's not good for gang rapers, it's just good for tax evaders. And he was sentenced to probation. He was given electroshock therapy, which is now considered to have basically exacerbated his sexual tendencies. He was also suspected of murdering 2 young girls in Sydney as well in 1965. In 1968, I believe, he got married, but his wife left him less than a week later, which, what does that tell you? She probably figured out he was crazy, and at that point he left Australia and migrated to the United States, thanks, and he settled down in Florida. Once he was in Florida, he basically achieved the American dream, right? He became successful in real estate. He picked up his photography habit, which would in the future help him lure young girls to be murdered by him. He lived in a mansion on the beach. He had a Porsche. He raced cars. He was just this like swinging bachelor who had the mansion, the car, the job, everything going for him. And, you know, even that wasn't enough to stop his dark tendencies. Through the years of 1971 and 1975, he faced several charges of sexual misconduct. He raped a young woman that he lured to his vehicle, promising her a career in modeling. He was charged, I feel like, several times in those years with these crimes, but never imprisoned, which is weird. Then he went back to Australia to visit his parents, and he again began behaving badly. He convinced two young girls, I think they were 10 and 12 years old, to pose naked for him, and he went to jail at that point, and his parents posted bail for him because, you know, that's what parents do. And they allowed him to go back to Florida. So they literally, like, he was charged with a crime, he was out on bail, and I guess the Australian police department was like, yeah, go back to Florida, we'll let you know when you can come back here for your trial, which never happened because it kept getting postponed and postponed and postponed. And then in '83 in Florida, he was suspected of raping another two teenage girls. So clearly, you know, he had some problems, and this was a pattern for him. And that's why I say that it feels like this guy who was living in Florida at the time that Tammy was living there, and maybe not in the exact same place, but in Florida, I feel like Tammy would have fit his ideal victim. She was described as being outgoing and friendly and talkative, that she was cheerful and wanted to, you know, be around people and learn things and, you know, talk to them constantly, and that people were charmed by her as well and drawn to her because of her really open and bubbly personality. And I feel like he would have been drawn to somebody like that because he would want somebody that he could charm in return, and somebody that was open and trusting and would believe the things he said. Also somebody that was looking for attention and needy for somebody to love or be loved by. So although he didn't begin his murder spree until 1984, clearly Christopher Wilder had been giving into his evil tendencies for many, many years, before even 1979 when Tammy was murdered. And I do believe that when he probably went on his killing spree, it hadn't been the first time that he killed somebody. So it was very possible that he and Tammy could have crossed paths, that she could have fallen for his "I'll make you a model" story, that she could have gone with him and in turn been one of his victims. Also, the red jacket that she was wearing, remember that from the beginning of this episode? The red jacket that had been alleged to be part of a promotional item that was sent out, and it said like the Auto Sports label on it or something. Christopher Wilder was a race car driver. He would have potentially been one of the people to receive this at a racing event or sent to it just to wear it for, you know, PR or merch. And it was a man's jacket that she was wearing. The connection to me is just crazy, and I don't know. I think he did it. Additionally, when he was living in Florida, he was a very successful real estate agent. And the last time that Tammy's high school boyfriend Kevin ever saw her was at a condo in St. Petersburg, and this was right before she died. So St. Petersburg is also in Florida. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Christopher Wilder had either access to this condo because he was selling it, or that he even owned it as property because he was renting it out or renovating it. There's just too much there piled on top of each other, too many glaring things that point to him for me to not think it was him, and this is the theory I do believe. The next theory is the truck driver theory. Tammy's family owned a restaurant back in Brooksville, and she waited tables there, and apparently a lot of truckers would come in, and she was very comfortable with truckers. She's already a friendly person, already open and willing to talk to anybody, and I can just imagine her, you know, hanging out with these truckers, talking to them, learning their lingo. She learned how to operate a CB radio from one, which her friend Laurel found out when they went on their hitchhiking trip across country. It is kind of an obvious next step that when she ran away again, that she would have hitchhiked with truckers again to get to upstate New York. There is not a lot of evidence supporting this claim, though, besides the fact that she was a hitchhiker, because the man that Marge saw with her at the Lima Diner that night was not driving a tractor trailer or any kind of like industrial truck, because she says she would have remembered seeing it in the parking lot, and she did not see anything like that. So that's a little less believable. I think it's just a theory of convenience that she was hitchhiking and somebody who picked her up, allegedly a trucker, did hurt her at that point. The next theory is the someone she knew theory. Now, if you're as much of a fan of true crime as me, or you've ever watched Law & Order, you know the statistic. They say that you are much more likely to be killed by somebody you know than a stranger. In this case, I don't know if that's actually true. Here's a little piece of kind of weird, mysterious evidence that we have about this case, but we don't know what to do with. Once Tammy left Brooksville, she ended up in Georgia, in this place called the Rainbow Prison Ministry. Now, since 1979, the owners and their son have both passed away, and this place is no longer operational. But what it was the owner was a minister, and he would go to prisons and minister the prisoners there, and then if they were released on like parole, he would let them come live in this Rainbow Prison Ministries place, and basically, you know, they would work for him, and it was like a halfway house. And she actually ended up there and was there for a little while. We don't know how she got there. We don't know why she was there. We don't know when she left, really, but what we do know is that she did spend some time there. And unfortunately, since everybody who was there at the time was deceased, and there's actually no record of any prisoners who stayed there, we don't know anything about it. We can't ask anybody. But it is weird, right, to have a 16-year-old girl or a 15-year-old girl at that time living amongst a bunch of ex-convicts or current convicts, and that's just a weird scenario to me. So they do theorize that she could have met somebody there who she then left with, and he is the one that killed her. Let me tell you a little bit about the St. Petersburg condo. Her high school boyfriend, Kevin, the last time he talked to her, and he is the last person who saw her alive, that knew her, she called him and she said, "Do you want to hang out? Basically, I want to see you." And he said, "Yes, where are you?" And she said she was in St. Petersburg, and she gave him directions of how to find her and where to pick her up. So he drove to St. Petersburg to this condo where she was apparently staying. She ran out to the car. They went to like McDonald's or got fast food or something. They had lunch and they talked a little bit. And according to Kevin, but he can't really remember, because we have to understand this was 35 years ago. He can't really remember her giving him any information about who she was staying with. He does remember her saying something along the lines that they had bought her some things and given her clothes or something, and that's kind of why he thought maybe she was involved in sex trafficking or the sex trade of some kind, like maybe they were pimping her out. He, you know, didn't get any more information from her about these people, which kind of blows my mind a little bit, because if you are thinking that this girl that you claim to care about is possibly in sex trafficking, like, wouldn't you try to get more information from her about where she was living with and who she was living with and what was going on? And her just saying like, "Yeah, they bought me some stuff," it doesn't feel like the end or the beginning of a conversation to me, right? It feels like the middle or just like a piece of the conversation. It doesn't feel like that's all that would be said and he'd be like, "Okay." But like I said, it was 35 years ago. He doesn't remember. He doesn't remember where the condo was. In that day, they didn't have MapQuest or cell phones, so he doesn't have text to verify what she said. She just gave him directions on the phone, probably from a payphone of some kind, and he followed them and got her. So he literally, the police have asked him, "Can we bring you back to this condo? Can we drive you around St. Petersburg so you can find this place?" And he says, "I literally have no recollection at all of where it is." So basically, this mystery condo in St. Petersburg has become a point of contention for people who lived there. She died shortly thereafter, so who was she staying with? When her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend or whatever he was at the time, when he dropped her back off at this condo, he claims that she, you know, ran up to the door and somebody from the inside opened the door for her, where she then proceeded to turn back, wave to him, and go inside. And that was the last time he ever saw her alive. So the whole thing's frustrating to me, and this is another reason why I'm agitated that she was never reported missing until so late in the game, like so many years later. The owner of the Rainbow Prison Ministries died in 2007. He was followed by his wife and his son. Obviously asking somebody where this random condo in St. Petersburg that they went to from 35 years back would be hard to recall, so I think it would have been easier for Kevin to remember where he'd been if it had, you know, been gotten to sooner. There is this little like I said, there's this little bit that I kind of gleaned from the Rainbow Prison Ministries and the condo in St. Petersburg, because the condo was directly after the Rainbow Prison Ministries. So I was looking into the owners of the ministries, their son. And it was so weird because he was almost like a ghost online, right? The son was named Marvin, and I saw his father's obituary, and that's where I found Marvin's name. And then I looked for Marvin, but I couldn't find any obituary, just this weird sort of website. I think it was called Grave Finder or something, which is super creepy, but just this weird website that showed when he was born, where he was living when he was born, and what year he died, and where he was living when he died. And it's weird to me because he was 61 years old when he died. And it didn't appear, you know, there was nothing saying like he's lived on and his wife or children. Like he didn't appear to be married, and he didn't appear to have children, which I think is weird for a 61-year-old man. I don't know. What kind of struck me was that it turned out that this man, Marvin, actually lived in Florida during the time Tammy lived there, in an adjacent county. I feel like he could have met Tammy in Florida. He could have been the one to have brought her to the Rainbow Prison Ministries, and he could also have been the one in that condo in St. Petersburg. Maybe they went back to Florida and he rented a condo or something while they decided what to do next. He would have been about 30-ish at the time of Tammy's death, and I didn't find a picture of him, so I can't really match him to the picture or the composite that Marge had given the police. But it's just weird, right? All these connections, like, I don't know. We don't know anything about Marvin. I can't find anything out about Marvin, just that he lived pretty close to Tammy. She ended up in his father's prison ministry, and then she was gone and found murdered directly after that. Because I feel like if this someone she knew theory is accurate, it would be him. They thought for a little bit it might have been Kevin, just because of the someone you know theory, and it's usually like the spouse or the romantic interest. But he had no motive for that. He seemed to genuinely care about her, and he was looking for her years later, right? Who kills somebody and then 30-something years later goes on a message board and asks where they are? Nobody. I feel like if you killed somebody and then they ended up, you know, being forgotten about, you're not gonna go reopen that can of worms by posting about her online. Additionally, just in this past year, I believe, they had found some male DNA on her body when she was found, but they didn't have any like DNA capabilities at that time, and they do now. So they just took this piece of DNA evidence they found on her body, and they tried to match it against 3 samples. We do not know who those 3 samples were from, except that one of them was Kevin, and all 3 of them were giving willingly, and none of the DNA samples from the 3 men matched the DNA on her body. I think what's most upsetting about this case, besides that a horrific murderer still roams free, possibly because, you know, he could still be alive today, is that this young girl who was troubled and had so much kind of misery and sadness and disappointment in her life that she never lost hope and never stopped dreaming that she could, you know, keep going and do something better with her life. And she kept running away, but she always kept her happiness and her bubbly personality and her openness with people. And in the end, you know, that's so sad to me. This girl, she was smart, she was bright, she was passionate, she had a love of life, she had a love of people. She loved talking to people. She cared about her friends so much. You can see in the letter that she writes to Laurel how deeply she feels for her. So she had this ability to love so deeply, so passionately, and so completely, even though she had never received that kind of love before. So it makes me so sad that she had to meet such an untimely and violent end. I suppose the one bright spot that we can find in this story is how the people of Caledonia really took to this girl. Not only John York, but the entire sheriff's department. Even to this day, they are still plugging away, trying to find out more about her whereabouts in the days leading up to her murder and who did this. No, they buried her in their town. They gave her a gravestone. When it was found out who she was, they replaced that gravestone with her actual name, date of birth, day she died, put a little bench near it. And her sister Pamela was asked, you know, do you want us to exhume her so you can bury her in her hometown? And Pamela basically said, no, I think she's been, you know, accepted here and she's been given so much kindness here. What Pamela actually told them was, what you created is more than a monument. You will forever have our gratitude to many people who spent years trying to give a name to a girl they had never met. And that was pretty much what happened. The people of Caledonia had given a wayward teen the acceptance and love that she had searched for and not received her entire short life. And because so many people have become personally invested and so attached emotionally to Tammy and to her situation, I do believe in my heart that we will one day find out what happened to her and who did this to her, and she will get the justice that she deserves. But either way, the people of Caledonia accepted her as part of their community. She is laid to rest there in Dansville to this day. I hope that if there is a heaven or if there's a spirit realm of some kind, that she's watching and knows and feels good about the amount of love and support and acceptance that she was given by these people who had never met her. People have been sitting at her gravesite crying and mourning her, and even though it seemed like the people who knew her in real life completely forgot about her, so many more people, hundreds of people, spent their days trying to figure out what happened to her. So I hope that wherever she is, that she has that little bit of peace and happiness that comes from knowing that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this Mystery Monday. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you want me to do another one of these. Let me know if you hated it and it creeps you out and now you want to unsubscribe from me and never talk to me again because you think I'm crazy. And subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of these Mystery Mondays. We will be putting one out every single week. This week it did not fall on a Monday because I literally fell down the rabbit hole of investigating this case because it was crazy. But I will try to do better next time. I will try to hit it every Monday. And if you have not checked out Bella Fiore's channel, she also does amazing cases and similar videos to this, and check her out. Anyways, thank you so much. Stay kind and stay beautiful, and I'll see you next time. Mwah.